Welcome to this behind the scenes stitch edition of the most amazing stitch. Now, if you've already watched my behind the scenes inside fly on the wall, this is the stitch that I used for the bodice of the dress. And I'll be leaving a link for this video at the end of this tutorial, so you can click on that and go straight to it and watch it. Now, it's a really simple little stitch, but it has tremendous stretch in one direction, and so it worked beautifully for being used on wearables. So let's get started. I'm using a 4-ply for this little tutorial, and I'm going to work with a 3mm crochet hook. Now, you could use any yarn, any hook for this particular stitch, depending on what the project is and what the goal is for your end result. So your stitch multiple working from your chain will be 2 plus 2 plus 2, so an even number. If, however, you were going to be wanting to add this stitch to an already finished project, you'd be popping it through in an odd number, because you will have gotten rid of the first chain that you're going to skip as you start this stitch. Right, so I'm going to just pop several chains here. I think we will do 16, and once we have gotten started, I'm just going to count those through, and I'm missing 2 chains, so let's finish those up. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to skip the first chain and we're going to work a single crochet into the second chain from the hook. Now, I'm using US stitch terms, so a single crochet in the second chain from the hook. Now, that has now reduced down the overall stitch count to 15, an odd number. So if you are adding this stitch to an already completed project, you will need to have an odd number in order to get this stitch to work. Now, you could always add an extra single crochet at the end if you needed to in order to make this pattern work. It's entirely up to you. So we're just going to work into each chain a single crochet across to the very end. So let me do that, and I will pop back to you once we get to the end. Right, so once we're at the end, we'll finish up. This is really just our foundation row of popping single crochets in place for us then to begin the 2-row pattern repeat. So at the end of each row, you will do 1 chain, a turning chain, so it is not counted as a stitch. So there should be 15 stitches. Started with 16 chain, skipped 1 chain, and then 15 stitches on that first row. So 1 chain to turn your work away from you, and we're going to begin in the very first stitch. Now, if you're new to crochet, we want you to take your hook under both of the loops of that stitch. So that's how the top of the stitch looks. So popping our hook into that very first stitch, and we're just going to work 1 single crochet. Now we're going to do 1 chain. That chain will take up the next stitch, so we're going to skip a stitch and work into the next stitch 1 single crochet. And chain 1, and again that chain takes up the next stitch, so we work in the next one, so skip a stitch and work in the next stitch 1 single crochet. And we're going to continue across the row. Now, it's important with this particular row that your chains are not too small or tight, that you just watch your tension. If you are pulling up your chains too small, they won't be able to travel across the distance of the stitch they're skipping, and it will draw your work in. It will begin to ease in and feel tight. So just keep an eye on that. If you're a beginner and you find your tensions are a little bit all over the place, just ensure that your chain has been kept nice and even with a bit of room in it. Oops, I don't know how that ended up all straggly. So we're creating individual little holes here, and these are what you can see in the finished work where you get this lovely raised open. So on our second row, you will see how in those gaps, the stitches we place in it create almost like a wee bit of an arched effect. So we're skipping a stitch and single crochet. Now at the end, we've got 2 stitches left. So again, just remember to keep your chain nice and loose in order to have plenty of distance across the skip stitches. So again, we're going to, for our last 2 stitches, chain, skip a stitch, and our last stitch is a single crochet in the last position. So on that row, you're always beginning with a single crochet and always ending with a single crochet. And that is the wrong side of the work. Okay. Now, whoops, I have forgotten to do my chain. We've turned to the right side, so let's just make sure we do that chain, turn our work. Now, we're going to look for the very first chain gap. We've got 1 stitch, 2 stitches, the chain. So in that gap, we're going to work 2 stitches, which basically cover those first 2 stitches, the single crochet and the chain. Then we've got a single crochet and a chain. So in that gap, again, we're going to work 2 single crochets. And this is how we'll be keeping our stitch count correct. Now by putting 2 single crochets into the chain gaps, it creates and pushes up that gap to have a little bit of an arch on it. Unlike a moss stitch where you're just doing a single crochet in each chain gap. This is a little bit different. It's quite cool how it creates a slight arched effect. So working across, each chain gap has 2 single crochets. So this is the second row of the pattern repeat. First row was our foundation, single crochets all the way across. Now at the end we have 1 chain gap left. We're going to do 2 single crochets and then we still have 1 stitch left. So we're going to pop a single crochet in that very last stitch. Isn't that cool? We just get a really lovely effect. So 15 stitches you should have maintained across this row. So an odd number, 1 stitch less than when you began. So we're going to chain 1 and turn, and we're back to our row of creating our gaps. So single crochet, 1 chain. Now you've got 2 single crochets. We're going to work into the second single crochet of each gap. Now the reason I point that out is if for some reason you're working this as a border and you're popping around a corner where you're doing increases, you want to ensure that your single crochet after your chain is always in that second position. The reason being we want to line up our gaps over the top of each other. So it's a good thing to remember if you are doing any increases and needing to get your pattern lined up, your single crochet is always in the left of the 2 single crochets that were placed in the chain gap. So we just continue working across, chain 1, miss a stitch, single crochet, chain 1, and our last stitch again will be a single crochet. And again you can see it's the second on the left single crochet of the chain gap. Okay, 1 chain and turn, and we'll complete the second row. So you can see here we're getting a really lovely effect of the arches. So again we're looking straight for the chain gap and we're working 2 single crochets straight into the first chain gap and across the row. Now what I discovered was the row that we do, that first row with the single crochet chain, skip a stitch, single crochet chain, skip a stitch, working it on the wrong side actually creates a really lovely potential border stitch. So you can see there the arches, see how those single crochets create a lovely arch. So look at the top of the row number 1, which is our single crochet chain, single crochet. You get just a slight little ripple. It's actually a really lovely effect. And so what I did on my washcloth, my example here, is I did several rows of the pattern around the washcloth and then finished with the wrong side row of the single crochet chain, because when you turn it to the right side you have this lovely little ridge effect. So isn't that beautiful? Now I did that sample. It was a 8-ply double knit light worsted, and I used a 5mm needle. And here's the example of the bodice that you'll see in the video. Now do go across, and the link will be up shortly. Pop across and be a fly on the wall in the design process. If you haven't subscribed, then I'd love you to subscribe to my channel to ensure you get notifications, and I'd love to hear any comments in regard to how you found this tutorial or any questions you might have. So that's it, Paula Hope. Happy crocheting.